I'm here joined by Nasli Kirkjen. I have no clue how to pronounce her last name, so at the end I'll let her correct me. Um, so we're going to give a brief presentation about how the ADA affects online learning, and then if you guys have any questions for us, we'll be happy to answer them. And I have a few questions for Nasli myself, so I'll go ahead and move to those at the end of the presentation. So let's get started here. What is a disability? A disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more life activity. So, walking, lifting, performing manual tasks like speaking, hearing, learning, all those pretty important life activities. Um, this includes people who, or at least the ADA's definition includes people who have a record of such impairment. So, if you were disabled in the past and it changed, the ADA's definition of a disability includes those people. Um, what is the actual ADA? The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was signed into law on July 26, 1990. So we're approaching its 30th anniversary pretty quickly. Um, and it's really such a substantial document that that's why I wanted to be able to go and analyze it a little bit more with all you guys. It prohibits discrimination based on a disability. So very important, just like the Civil Rights Act of whenever that was signed, went into effect. So very important legislation. It requires that employers offer reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities and requires accessible accommodations for public and commercial facilities. So that's why we have wheelchair ramps. And I'll get into that a little bit more coming forward. It expanded upon Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which guaranteed certain civil rights to people with disabilities. Now, while that act guaranteed some things, it wasn't a very long piece of legislation, and it didn't really have a spine until the ADA was passed a few years later. So the content breakdown of the ADA, Title I protects against discrimination by employers. So really, that's not a big thing for the students, unless, of course, you're working an on-campus job. But any of our faculty, that's pretty important. And I encourage you to reach out to your campus's disability services office if you have any sort of problems with that. Title II of the ADA prohibits discrimination at public entities on the local level. So your parks, just any sort of things like that. And then Title III of the ADA prevents discrimination on the basis of disabilities in regards to the enjoyment of goods, services, and facilities. So a lot of the time, colleges, they're a service. So that's really where colleges fall, and they also have facilities. So anything that pertains to colleges is usually in Title III of the ADA. Title IV of the ADA was an amendment that was added a few years later, in 2008, I believe, and it really focused on telecommunications, so phone calls and things like that, but still made no mention of any sort of web web accommodations and things like that. Title V outlines any other miscellaneous provisions, and really, for the purposes of this presentation, it's not that important. So we'll move on to the next slide here. So what is ADA compliance? Provisions in the ADA require that establishments make certain accommodations. Some of these include wheelchair ramps or elevators, handicapped parking spots, sidewalk slopes, counter height that has to be a certain height in order to be ADA compliant, and braille on certain signage. And those are only some of the few. There are so many things that are required for ADA compliance. So if you have any sort of issues and things like that where you think that something might not be ADA compliant, when we do eventually go back to school, contact your school's disability services offices or accessibility services office, and try to work that out with them. So next we have ADA and the internet. Because the ADA was signed in 1990, there was no widespread use of the internet. So it really doesn't make any documentation for websites. It makes no mention of that. However, it's become accepted that websites fall of a public place. So if something's a public place, like a school, and the school has a website, the website is considered to be required to be ADA compliant. And that's just something that's been sort of echoed in our court system over the last couple of years. Because of this, I already got through that point. Thus, it's recommended that companies, schools, things like that, follow the web content accessibility guidelines. Because there's no real guideline set, that's become the really accepted. Next, we have ADA and online learning. Since there's no provisions for the ADA and websites in the actual document, the gray area becomes even deeper when it pertains to online learning. Some organizations and universities have published guidelines creating accessible courses. One of the courses I was looking at or one of the documents I was looking at when I was creating this presentation was made by SUNY Poly, and they've really done excellent work over there. I have friends over there that do things, work in accessibility services over there. So just our basic guidelines for compliance, links, usually in all of these different things I look through, they're recommended that you give it a text description rather than just a click here. And that's really just for anything. When you're designing a website, click here, that just looks like clickbait. Text should be easily readable fonts because, if you have a vision impairment, if something's already difficult to read, it'll make it that much harder for other people. So avoid bright colors and things you want to have things with contrast. You want to make sure that images are clear and that animated images are limited to educational experience, like something that helps your educational experience. And then you also want to make sure that audio is clear, and hopefully you guys can all hear me well. And then you want to have a written transcript after the event or after the class, or closed captioning during the class, so that the student, if they have a hearing impairment, can really fully get engaged in the class like any other student. And that's also echoed in what I put for videos. So that's pretty much what I had. I didn't really want to go too deep into things because I'm not a lawyer and I don't want to give the appearance of a lawyer. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer. And I didn't get the chance to check this through with a lawyer. I did have some guidance that a lawyer gave me, but I wanted to keep it very general so that, don't take my advice with a grain of salt. How about that? So now I want to introduce Nasli, and Nasli, if you could go ahead and introduce your position and what you do for SUNY, that would be great.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, John. My name is Nasli Kirkjian. My pronouns are she, hers. I am the coordinator of Disability, Diversity, and Non-Traditional Student Services within the Office of University Life at SUNY System Administration. Additionally, I serve as the Electronic and Information Technology, or EIT, Accessibility Officer at SUNY as well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on the presentation here, Nasli. So our first question that me and the Disability Services Committee came up with was, what was SUNY really working on before we were hit with the coronavirus in early April, February, before then, or March, sorry, rather?
Well, I think it's important to first share that all of the SUNY campuses have a designated disability or accessibility services office that exists to support the equal access needs of students with disabilities in their living and learning environments. To answer your question directly, there's been a very heavy focus on the accessibility of digital or online environments. Last June, SUNY's Board of Trustees passed a EIT accessibility policy, which is intended to advance our digital accessibility efforts in areas such as websites, digital content, the procurement of third-party products and services, classroom accessibility is in there as well, in addition to libraries. And so that is a really big focus for me and for the SUNY system as a priority. And so I've been working closely with the campus offices of disability services, chief information officers, distance education professionals, instructional designers, and way more people to get up to speed on what we should be doing and develop a plan to enhance the inclusiveness of our online environment. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, and thank you, Nasli. And you guys, I guess, I don't want to say that you lucked out with the coronavirus here, but, having that, working on that before we were hit with this, that seems like that would have been very important going forward for our students who are now all online. Um, so that, that being said, like, what the work? What are you guys doing differently now? Yeah, that's sort of our next question there.
Well, truthfully, John, our responsibilities to provide individual academic adjustments and modifications remain unchanged. I think the real difference is that the offices of disability and accessibility services are now operating remotely like many other offices on campus. And so it's very likely that the processes to register and request accommodations are slightly different. They used to be face-to-face, and now everything is online. And so, at SUNY, we created and disseminated guidance on, resources for students with disabilities to our chief academic officers and disability services directors very early on, right after the pandemic started, and we had to switch to remote instruction. And so we've been continuously providing guidance to ensure that academic continuity and accessibility issues are addressed swiftly for our campuses. So, I think we've done a really good job at switching given the circumstances, and there's possibly accommodation needs have changed as a result of the change to the online format. And so I think, like with all students, we've encouraged flexibility and provided some really solid resources for faculty and instructional support staff to enhance the accessibility of the technologies and the content being used.
Yeah, and like you said, I think you guys have been doing a fantastic job. So let me just congratulate you there. Because really, what I've heard from all of my committee members and just people in general that I've talked to, that, even though it's hard for everybody, that you guys are making the switch really well. So I appreciate
Well,
that. And thank you for that.
I do have to give much credit to the campus disability services directors and coordinators and their staff, as they're the ones on the ground that are working one-on-one with students every day. And so, we are absolutely happy to help from a system perspective, but it really is thanks to the individual faculty and senior administrators and the disability services practitioners that are really making a difference.
Yeah, so thank them for that too. So we'll move into our next question here. When we return to campuses, what kind of changes do you expect? What have we learned from the online learning component of the coronavirus? So what kind of changes do we expect, if any? I don't know if you expect any, or if it's just going to be going straight back to it.
I think similar to, along the lines of what the governor's been saying, it's not so much a return to normal as trying to achieve a new normal. I know that, we're working through various scenario planning for reopening campuses. And so I cannot say with confidence what that will look like. It may vary depending on the region. In terms of disability and accessibility, I think the pandemic has really elevated the digital accessibility importance, and that, we'll continue to take lessons learned from this remote teaching remainder of the semester, and continue to improve. Should there be continued online courses or hybrid courses and things like that. And even if we do have face-to-face courses, it's going to be critical for our professors to provide those materials in electronic format as well, because we don't really know which students may return to campus, and so it's important for the students that are face-to-face and the students that are learning at a distance to have access to those materials. Trying to think of what else. Those are the kinds of questions that and discussions that we are having right now. So, you know, we will learn more and share more as we move forward.
Okay. And then, so that kind of leads into my next question too. Where can we, as students and as students with disabilities, go to find all of these resources, and how can we be updated with all the latest from SUNY?
Well, you know, actually every campus now should have a designated EIT accessibility officer. That's a key requirement of the EIT accessibility policy. And so I don't believe this information is widely available, but that is something we can absolutely look into. You know, we have a SUNY EIT accessibility policy that's publicly available on the website. You can do a Google search, and I'm also happy to find it and put it in the chat as well. And we also have what's publicly available is the final report and recommendations of the original EIT Accessibility Steering Committee, which developed the standards and requirements for SUNY. So those are definitely available, and you know, whatever y'all are interested in learning more about, I'm happy to share information. So yeah.
Yeah, that would be great if we could work out a program, or if, you know, we could have students ask questions for you, things like that going in the future. So that would be something to work on, I think.
Yeah.
So now I have a question that came from the chat from Denise Vogel. Is it possible to get audio for some online learning websites? For example, tests online are not done with audio.
I'm trying to make sure I understand your question. Is the question, can exams be made available in audio format?
I think that's a question, because they said that tests online are not done with audio. So I guess maybe, can the test be have an audio component to it, or can they read the questions out loud?
So, you know,
sort of like if you were to go to your on campus. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that, you know, if that's something that you think would benefit you, and you haven't, you know, spoken to the Disability or Accessibility Services Office, I encourage you to start there. Generally speaking, I don't think exams are provided in an audio format. But for students who are registered with Disability Services, in which that is a appropriate accommodation, you know, the Disability and Accessibility Services offices have provided assistive technologies to enable the exams to be read out loud. So that's definitely a possibility, for sure.
So then to get that done, if this student, per se, has that problem, would they go to their campus information officer or their disability or accessibility services officer?
I would start with the campus disability or accessibility services office.
Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. I can't see the chat here. Taryn's typing all the answers or the questions to me, so hopefully that answers it. So then I'll go back to my pre-recorded. I only have a few more questions here for you, Nasli, and thank you so much for being on with us and giving us your time here. So really, like, how can we as students get involved with any sort of advocacy that you guys are doing online? How can we help our fellow students, and how can we help ourselves in this difficult time here?
I would love to speak more with students with and without disabilities to better understand how you would like to be involved in these discussions and implementation of the policy and subsequent plans. So, John, I think if I may suggest that through the Student Assembly Disability Services Committee would be a great place to start. I can also share that the CUNY system also has a pretty substantially sized disability services organization. I think it's called COSB. So perhaps you, John, and your peers, perhaps we could collaborate with the CUNY students and build a coalition to really elevate some of the, requests and needs of students with disabilities in higher education across New York State. Of course, if you want to keep it, to just SUNY students, that's great. But I'm just, giving a example of a longstanding student disability organization, which, you may want to model the committees or a coalition after.
Yeah, I think that would be,
feel free
be great.
to reach out.
Oh, Natalie, absolutely. Before I go and start doing any of this, it's going to be, email to you right away. So thank you so much for offering that. And that's something that I definitely will look into. And hopefully, my committee members, they'll all get on board with that, and we'll talk with the CUNY students and see if we can really pull something together, because I think that would be great.
I also
so then
I'll just
my
add
last
one more.
Oh yeah,
Can I just add one
go
more
ahead.
thing?
Sorry. Yeah.
So I just want to say that I think in order for our EIT accessibility efforts to be as successful as I imagine, we need students. I think that, we think we know what we need, either based on the, technical standards that John referenced before, such as the WCAG, but we also need the user experience. And so, we warmly welcome you to share your experiences or barriers to your individual campus, of course, but, if you'd like to raise them to me as well, that would be most helpful.
Yeah, so definitely reach out to Nasli and reach out to me with, probably Nasli first, with any sort of concerns and things like that. And hopefully we'll get this coalition running at some point here. So then Nasli, my last question here, if I could find it on my page, what are some challenges that you expect students to face, and how do you think that they can overcome them in the coming months, and if we don't go back to campus in fall?
That's a great question. I think all students face some challenges with time management, perhaps, distractions, reducing distractions. Everyone is possibly at home, or maybe they're living off campus. And so I think that general challenges include, organizing your time well, and making sure that you're keeping up with your studies, and reducing distractions. We're on the computer now, and so it's a very quick click to other websites that have nothing to do with school. And I think those are the major challenges that affect all students, including students with disabilities, but it may especially affect students with disabilities.
Well, thank you, Nasli, and thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody who tuned in to our presentation here. We'll be posting it live to you, or not live, this is live. We'll be posting it to YouTube later. So if you have any sort of questions or things like that, feel free to email me. I don't have my email up here, but I'll request that Taryn puts it up there. And Nasli, if you're comfortable putting your email on there as well, that would be great too. So thank you guys, and I say that's a wrap.
All right.
Thank you, Nasli.
Thank you.